Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, November 30th, 2023. This is the Excerpt. Today, how day drinking went undetected at a top U.S. military base. Plus, there's a day extension to the Israel-Hamas truce, and Henry Kissinger has died. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, is best known to the American public as the group that tracks Santa's sleigh on Christmas Eve. But their other role is a lot more critical to American safety, and on this, we recently learned that there were some potentially high risks. To learn more, I spoke with USA Today's Pentagon correspondent Tom Vanden on this exclusive bombshell of a story. Tom, thanks for making the time.
Taylor, good to be here.
So Tom, can you just start by telling our listeners what NORAD is?
NORAD is the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and it's based out in Colorado Springs at Peterson Air Force Base. It's a joint command with the Canadians. Started in the 50s, designed to protect the United States and Canada from attack. At the time in the 50s, at the height of the Cold War, that was from the fear about Soviet bombers coming over the North Pole and bombing the United States and Canada. That's where it started, and since then it's expanded its writ to maritime surveillance as well, protecting us against attacks from North Korea, potentially missile attacks from China, all that sort of thing. So threats to the United States and Canada.
And so getting to the heart of this story, Tom, what exactly happened last week?
Sources have been telling us for several weeks and months about issues and concerns they had about day drinking inside this command, and in particular in a planning office. And through the reporting that we did, we went to Northcom, and to their credit, General Glenn Van Herk stepped up and said, yes, we investigated. We found beer and liquor inside one of the planning offices. It was behind a key code locked door, and it had a poster of John Wayne on it. So it was known colloquially as the John Wayne Saloon. So one of the sources told us that the source had a drink inside this. Many of these people felt very dismayed by it. Some were disgusted by it, thought it had no business operating inside a sensitive military headquarters. Inside those offices also were computers with access to classified military information.
So, it sounds like this saloon potentially put the entire country at risk, Tom. How were people able to set up this speakeasy in the first place?
That's what the investigation that General Van Herk has set up. That's what he's trying to figure out, how that could ever come to pass and who knew about it. And I did ask him directly whether or not national security was ever compromised. He says he doesn't believe it was, but obviously this is a major concern, and they're going to try to figure out and get to the bottom of it.
I'm wondering, Tom, more broadly, how big of a problem is drinking on military bases in general?
It's a huge problem, and it has many different aspects to it, but it's one of the key issues that investigators in the military have found when they look at sexual assault, for instance, that it's a contributing factor to a lot of these problems, and the military's had an epidemic of it. Officials there refer to it as a tragedy, but a lot of times these young folks get drunk and bad things happen. It's not just young folks either. There are commanders who have had problems with alcohol. We've written about them extensively. It's an issue. It's a cultural issue in the military, as it is in the general public. But alcohol and military decision-making really don't mix.
And you mentioned this investigation at NORAD. What's next for this, Tom?
Well, we'll find out in a couple of weeks. General Van Herk said the investigation wasn't going to take months, that it would take weeks. So, the next step is to find out what they determine, and we'll certainly stay on top of that.
All right, Tom Vanden covers the Pentagon. Great reporting work on this, Tom. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Taylor. Appreciate it.
A temporary truce between Israel and Hamas has been extended for another day, according to the mediator nation Qatar. The announcement this morning came just minutes before the latest truce was set to expire. Israel and Hamas confirmed the extension. Qatar says the agreement follows the same previous terms, where Hamas had released 10 Israeli hostages per day in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. Before today, the ceasefire has led to 96 hostages getting freed, as well as 180 Palestinians. Officials in Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. have been working with Israeli and Hamas leaders on the temporary truce extensions this week, with an eye toward ending the war. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that fighting will continue until Hamas has been crushed. Cases of a new COVID variant have tripled in just 2 weeks, according to CDC estimates. I spoke with USA Today health reporter Eduardo Cuevas for the latest. Eduardo, thanks for hopping on the Excerpt today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start here. What exactly is this new variant of COVID-19?
So it's called BA286. It's a subvariant of Omicron. If you remember that from a couple of years ago, which came to dominate cases. Like all viruses, the COVID-19 virus constantly mutates to make it easier to spread or be resistant to medicines or vaccines. So the good news with BA286 is it doesn't appear to be a greater risk for serious illness compared to other circulating variants, according to the CDC.
How quickly are cases of this variant picking up, and where in the country are we seeing this in particular at this point?
Yeah, good question. So scientists first identified BA286 months ago, and it's now seen a threefold increase in estimated viruses circulating compared to projections a couple weeks ago. And that's according to the CDC's variant tracker. 2 weeks ago, that number was 3% estimated to be around, and now we're looking at about 1 in 10 cases. So a little bit of an uptick. And just to note, the CDC exercises caution on these estimates, but experts and health officials I've spoken to say there's evidence it is spreading, particularly in regions like the New York metro area where I am now.
Eduardo, at this point, what are we seeing when it comes to hospitalizations and deaths around COVID-19?
Right now, we're seeing increases in hospitalizations and deaths in the most recent reporting period, but the CDC again says BA286 doesn't appear to be driving these numbers. Still, during winter months, we can expect figures around hospitalizations and deaths to be increasing.
A lot of folks are continuing to wonder whether they need to keep upping their vaccines at this point. Do vaccines help protect against this new variant?
Yeah, the CDC says the updated COVID-19 vaccine provides increased protection against BA286, the variant that we're seeing now. So if you haven't gotten your latest shot, you can use this as encouragement to do so. Also to note, tests and medications are also expected to be effective against BA286. And that's important because if you test positive, you should stay at home.
Eduardo, people hear stories about COVID and immediately we all go back to 2020 and 21 and some of the chaos of COVID in that era. What is the likelihood that this could spin out of control compared to, say, that first outbreak in 2020 or during some of these other subsequent variants?
CDC says the updated COVID-19 vaccine provides increased protection against BA286, the variant that we're seeing now. That being said, the World Health Organization recently reclassified BA286 as a variant of interest. So we'll keep an eye out. But again, risk remains low from health officials and experts.
All right. Eduardo Cuevas covers health for USA Today. Thanks as always, Eduardo.
Thank you.
Henry Kissinger has died. The diplomat shaped U.S. foreign policy in the second half of the 20th century. He worked in various positions, including Secretary of State, over his career. Kissinger helped former President Richard Nixon establish U.S. relations with China, negotiated the 1973 ceasefire with North Vietnam, and reached Cold War arms agreements with the Soviet Union. He's also been deeply criticized for the U.S. bombing campaign in Cambodia during the Vietnam War, which spread instability and led indirectly to the 1975 takeover by the Khmer Rouge regime, which went on to slaughter some 2 million Cambodians. Critics have also accused him of playing a role in the fall of Salvador Allende, the democratically elected Marxist president of Chile, who was deposed and died in a military coup in 1973. Allende's death came before 2 decades of authoritarian rule in Chile. And others have pointed to Nixon White House tape recordings as evidence that he worked internally to delay an end to the bloody war in Vietnam until after Nixon's 1972 re-election, a period that saw thousands of U.S. combat deaths and civilian casualties. In later years, Democratic and Republican presidents alike sought his counsel as they shaped foreign policy in the wake of the Cold War and the 9/11 terror attacks, and companies and governments paid millions to his consulting firm for strategic analysis and contacts with those still in power. Kissinger originally came to the U.S. at the age of 15 as a Jewish immigrant who had escaped Nazi Germany with his family. His consulting firm said that he died at his home in Connecticut. Henry Kissinger was 100 years old. The North American Wolverine has been listed as a threatened species because of impacts on its habitats by climate change, according to a Fish and Wildlife Service announcement yesterday. The designation will give the animal federal protections under the Endangered Species Act to try and prevent the population from declining. It applies to the North American wolverine in the contiguous U.S., where as few as 300 surviving wolverines remain. Scientists warn that warming temperatures in the coming decades are expected to shrink the mountain snowpack the animals rely on for food and reproduction. Threatened species are likely to become endangered in the foreseeable future, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. And the EPA says there are more than 1,300 endangered and threatened species in the U.S. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. If you use a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. And as always, you can find us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.